Chapter 1032. However, he was in a foreign land and couldn't send a message to the sect master. Fortunately, as long as he didn't die, the battlefield mark wouldn't disappear. The sect master and the others could use this method to determine his safety. "What's up with that Dao soldier?" Feng Wujiang asked. Jianghu Hong and the others had seen Dao Shisan before, so they had some guesses about Lu Ye's background. Similarly, Feng Wujiang also saw the Dao soldier and confirmed that Lu Yi was a cultivator from the 9 states. "It's a complicated story." Lu Yi explained in detail how he was captured by Yu Daiwei and taken to a small secluded mystic realm. Feng Wujiang raised an eyebrow. "What does that supremacy look like?" "His appearance is very ordinary. There's nothing special about him, but his cultivation level should be very high. As for his height, he's about this tall." Lu Yi described briefly. "Taishan." Feng Wujiang immediately understood and saw through the supremacy's identity. "Eldest senior brother, you know him?" Lu Yi couldn't help but recall that the first thing eldest senior brother asked when he saw him was, "How's Taishan?" Now it seemed that eldest senior brother probably thought he was from Taishan. Otherwise, why would he have a Dao soldier with him? More than that, Feng Wujiang looked like he was reminiscing. "Taishan and I have known each other for a long time. He was my most capable subordinate back then. He also comprehended the refining method of Dao soldiers, so he naturally knows how to refine one." "You said that he had something like a disc in his hand?" "Yes, when he showed it to me, it seemed like he wanted me to do something with the disc, but no matter how I looked at it, I couldn't find anything special about it." Feng Wujiang's expression was slightly grave. Lu Yi didn't know what the disc was, but he knew. After all, he was the one who found it back then. However, even if he used it at that time, he couldn't win over the world, so he hid it with Chiu Min. He didn't expect that it would fall into Tai Shan's hands now. It seemed that Tai Shan hadn't been quiet in the past few decades when he wasn't in the 9 states. Feng Wujiang didn't know how it ended up in Tai Shan's hands. The only thing he was sure of was that it must have come from Chiu Min based on his understanding of Tai Shan. There was probably some coercion involved. While he was deep in thought, Lu Yi asked, "Eldest senior brother, what exactly is a Dao armament?" Dao 13 had said that he was a Dao soldier, but Lu Yi had never figured out what a Dao soldier was. However, since eldest senior brother could recognize that Dao 13 was a Dao soldier, he should know something about it. "It's a humanoid artifact refined using a secret technique. Under this secret technique, a Dao soldier can grow at an incredible speed, but the price is that their potential is squeezed out. Therefore, a Dao soldier will have a good cultivation, but there will be no room for improvement. Moreover, this secret technique will cause great damage to the Dao soldier's sentience. Take the one following you for example. He has a 5th-order Divine Sea Realm cultivation, but he won't be able to advance any further in his life. You should be able to tell that his sentience isn't high." Lu Yi nodded slightly. Only now did he understand what a Dao soldier was. Just as eldest senior brother had said, Dao 13's intelligence was not high. At best, he was only slightly better than a real fool. He was slightly frightened. From the looks of it, Dao 13 was not the only Dao soldier under Tai Shan's command. 13's rank explained many things. That Dao soldier was refined by Tai Shan. "How did you make him obey your orders?" "Junior brother, I used a little trick to control his mind." Feng Wujiang's expression brightened. "Control his mind? Like the blood race's blood seal?" Lu Yi said, "I've never seen the blood seal before and I don't know what it does, but my method is probably stronger than the blood seal. My control over Dao 13 is absolute. He won't disobey my orders." "Is there a limit?" Feng Wujiang asked again. "What do you mean? Is there a limit to the number of people you can control?" "There shouldn't be." Lu Yi thought about it. He had enslaved a lot of blood race people along the way, and so far, he hadn't felt anything wrong with it. After all, the Soul Control Divine Rune was planted in the Soul Slave's Spirit Sea. Under normal circumstances, as long as Lu Yi could break through the soul defense of others, he could plant the Soul Control Divine Rune. Of course, if the soul was too strong, it would be difficult to plant the Soul Control Divine Rune. To provide you with the latest update of Great God Momo's Human Race Great Sage. Chapter 1032, Soul Control the Wonderful Uses of the Formation Board. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. When the rune was planted, the target would resist. Take Jianghu and the others for example. Lu Yi estimated that even if they opened up their soul defense, he wouldn't be able to plant the soul control divine rune on them. The difference in soul power was too great. An expert like Jianghu would only need to struggle a little to prevent his rune from forming. Good. Feng Wuxiang's expression was excited. He patted Lu Yi's shoulder and said, "Junior Martial Brother, it's great that you're here." Lu Yi looked at him in confusion. Feng Wuxiang smiled and said, "You're new here, so rest for now. I'll tell you later." "Junior Martial Brother, you said you have a lot of questions. You can ask them now." Lu Yi did have a lot of questions, but he didn't know where to start. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Senior Martial Brother, were you sent here after the final battle?" "Yes, it's been almost 40 years. "What about Senior Jianghu and the others?" "They came even earlier," Feng Wuxiang smiled. Feng Wuxiang chuckled. "Furthermore, they weren't sent here in batches. They were all sent here one by one. The span of time was very long, several hundred years. Junior brother, you were also sent here by heaven's will. You should have experienced your cultivation being sealed before, right?" Lu Yi nodded. "Yes." Now it seemed that all the human cultivators sent to the blood refining realm by Tianji had their cultivation sealed and had to slowly recover. He wasn't the only one. "Junior Martial Brother, have you thought about why Tianji sent us here but sealed our cultivation? Heaven and earth have their own will. Tianji is the will of the 9 provinces. This realm should also have its own will, but it's not as strong as Tianji's. We were sent here from the 9 provinces, which is tantamount to invading this realm. If we don't conceal ourselves, the will of heaven and earth in this realm will react and will be in a disadvantageous situation." Feng Wuxiang looked at Lu Yi in surprise. "Junior Martial Brother, you're indeed quick-witted to be able to think of this. We also had our own speculations as to why Tianji wanted to seal our cultivation, and our thoughts are similar to yours." He sighed. "But because of this, many seniors were put in a disadvantageous situation as soon as they appeared. They lost a lot of people. Even if Jianghu and the others had a strong foundation, their strength was limited after their cultivation was sealed. If they were unlucky, they would be discovered by the blood race experts. Naturally, it boded ill rather than well. Why did Zhuzhou Tianji send so many top experts here? To save the human race of this realm?" Lu Yi asked. "Probably. We've been painstakingly searching all these years, but we haven't been able to find an accurate answer. Almost everyone was sent here without knowing anything. Back then, when I came here, the Jade Blood Sacred Land didn't exist, and those seniors didn't have much contact with each other. They were all experts who could suppress an era. Junior Martial Brother, you also understand that no one is willing to submit to another. Moreover, there are people from both sides, so it's naturally difficult to unify. After that, I spent about 10 years contacting many seniors and established the Jade Blood Sacred Land in the Shunkai Sea with them. Then, I moved a large number of humans from the surrounding 50,000 kilometers of the Shunkai Sea to this place. That's how the Jade Blood Sacred Land came to this place. But because of this, we've been completely targeted by the blood race. Over the past few decades, the blood race has come to encircle us once every few years. Many seniors have died in battle, and the defenses of the Jade Blood Sacred Land have been weakened layer by layer. This time, the blood race has mobilized far more troops than before. Moreover, according to the information gathered by those seniors, the blood race has also mobilized a large number of experts this time. It's very likely that a large number of holy seeds are hidden among them. Senior Martial Brother, what do you want me to do?" Lu Yi asked. "There's indeed something I need you to do, but there's no rush. The blood race is still gathering their forces. Moreover, it won't be easy for such a large force to cross the Shunkai Sea. We still have at least 2 months to prepare. However, the fact that Zhuzhou Tianji chose to send you here at this time means that you have the ability to help the Jade Blood Sacred Land increase its strength. I don't know what it is, but Junior Martial Brother should know." Lu Yi thought for a moment and took out a formation disc from his storage space and handed it to his senior martial brother. Feng Wujiang took it suspiciously and tried to inject spirit energy into it. In an instant, the formation disc was activated and an invisible energy surged out, enveloping Lu Yi and Feng Wujiang. Feng Wujiang's expression shook. This is, carefully sensing it, he could clearly sense the effect of this invisible energy. Under the guidance of this energy, his and Lu Ye's aura seemed to be very light. Great God Momos, the Great Sage of Human Tao, is the soonest update. Chapter 1032, Great Sage, the Wondrous Uses of Formation Discs, the Jade Blood Sacred Land. Moreover, he felt that he could borrow power from Lu Yi as long as Lu Yi didn't resist. At the same time, Lu Yi had a similar feeling. In his perception, his senior martial brother beside him contained an extremely terrifying power. It was a power that Lu Yi didn't dare to borrow. If he used it rashly, his body wouldn't be able to withstand it. Calming himself down, Lu Yi said, "The Twin Qi and Branch Formation Disc contains a spirit pattern called Twin Qi and Branch Formation. Within the range of the spirit pattern, everyone can easily borrow power from each other." Lu Yi had improved this formation disc many times. Now, the formation disc could cover a wider range and had practical use. It was no longer like the first time he made it, where it could only cover a range of 10 feet. Now, the formation disc could cover a range of 15 feet. 15 feet wasn't small. It could be used to save lives at a critical moment. Feng Wujiang's eyes flashed. He quickly realized the wondrous use of this formation disc. Borrowing power is only secondary. If we use this formation disc to form a formation, Lu Yi nodded. I've also considered this. Different formations require different numbers of cultivators to form. Generally speaking, only cultivators who were familiar with each other, cooperated with each other, and could trust each other could form a formation. Moreover, it required a lot of practice. Therefore, formations were rarely seen in battlefields between two factions. Most cultivators simply cooperated with each other. This was because not just anyone could form a formation with others to fight against the enemy. To see the soonest update of the Great Sage of Human Tao, Great God Momos, the Great Sage of Human Tao, is the soonest update. Chapter 1032, Great Sage of Human Tao, the Wondrous Uses of Formation Discs. Chapter 1033. If different cultivators wanted to form a formation, the first thing they needed to do was to connect their auras. However, auras were invisible and formless. Everyone was different, so it was naturally very difficult to connect their auras. Therefore, many large sects would have a group of people specifically responsible for practicing formations. These people generally didn't have bad aptitudes. If their cultivation wasn't high enough, it would be useless for them to form a formation. However, it also wouldn't be too high. Cultivators with high aptitudes would rather cultivate alone and increase their cultivation if they had the time to practice formations. Generally speaking, these people were those who were neither high nor low in their respective sections. After they formed a formation, they would be able to display power that surpassed their own level, increasing the foundation and strength of their sections. Within the 9 provinces, it was very rare to see formations on the front lines where the two factions were fighting. This was because casualties were frequent on the front lines. It wasn't easy to practice formations, but if they were damaged in a great battle, all of their previous practice would become meaningless. Therefore, although formations were very useful, it often required a large amount of manpower, energy, and even time. As a result, there weren't many cultivators in the 9 provinces who were willing to practice formations. However, what if there was something in this world that could allow people to easily connect their auras without the need for long periods of practice and without the need for too much reliance and trust between them? Then they could easily form a formation to defend against the enemy. The Twin Qi-linked formation disc was such an item that could assist them. It had to be said that Feng Wujiang's experience was still more extensive than Lu Ye's. Lu Ye's original intention of refining the Twin Qi-linked formation disc was to let the cultivators within the disc's range borrow each other's strength. It was only later that he realized that it could be used to form a formation. However, Feng Wujiang saw the greatest use of this item with a single glance. It wasn't used to borrow strength, but to assist cultivators in forming a formation. Moreover, if this item was used to form a formation, the effect might be better than just forming a formation. This was because cultivators could borrow strength from each other in a formation. If cultivators were said to be cigarette parts, then the twin chi-linked formation disc could easily fit these parts together, forming an inseparable whole. It could be said that the appearance of such an item could play an immeasurable role in a large-scale battle. As long as there were enough twin chi-linked formation discs, the overall strength of the Jade Blood Holy Land could increase by at least 30% or even more. This was extremely important to the current situation of the Blue Blood Holy Land. Over the past few decades, the Jade Blood Holy Land had not been able to nurture many powerful cultivators. However, with the massive population base, there were also many human cultivators. There were Cloud River tier cultivators and True Lake tier cultivators, and the twin chi-connected formation disc was suitable for them to use. Is it difficult to refine it? Feng Wujiang asked. Not at all. Lu Yi shook his head. How difficult was it to refine the array disc? Branding the spirit branch spirit veins on it was even easier. I'll take it and study it first. Feng Wujiang stood up. Junior brother, rest for now. I'll talk to you later. The appearance of the twin chi-connected spirit array disc undoubtedly made Feng Wujiang very excited. He couldn't wait to have his subordinates refine more in preparation for the upcoming battle. After giving these instructions, he soared into the sky and flew in a certain direction. Lu Yi could only swallow the words that were at the tip of his tongue. He really wanted to tell eldest senior brother that it wasn't difficult for him to refine that thing, but that might not be the case for others. The core of that thing wasn't a formation disc, but a spirit vein. Such a complex spirit vein wasn't something that just anyone could brand during the refining process. After eldest senior brother left, a green-robed man walked over and cupped his fists. Sir, the Holy Lord has asked me to take you to rest. Lu Yi nodded slightly. Lead the way. After a short while, the green-robed man led him into a large hall and settled him down. He had been travel-worn for the past half a year. If he hadn't met Jianghu and the others, he would have had to travel for more than a month to reach the Shenkei Sea. He was indeed a bit tired. After sitting cross-legged for a while, Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes. He felt like he had forgotten something, but when he thought about it carefully, he couldn't remember what it was. He couldn't be bothered to think about it. When the time came, he would naturally remember it. Return at the foot of the mountain, Dao Shisan was sleeping soundly. When he opened his eyes, Lu Yi was already gone. He stood up and scratched his head. He didn't know what to do, so he just stood there like a wooden stake and waited. His thoughts were simple. If he couldn't find Lu Yi would come looking for him. He had to admit that not having high intelligence wasn't necessarily a bad thing. At the very least, he would have no worries. At the same time, somewhere at the foot of the sacred mountain, clinking sounds could be heard. Most of them were bare-chested men, sweating profusely. The surrounding environment was hot, and from time to time, scorching flames would erupt. This was the Holy Land's refining workshop. It was specifically responsible for refining spirit treasures for Divine Sea Realm cultivators. Feng Wujiang stood next to a skinny old man. That old man was the same as Jianghu and the others. His hair and beard were all white. Although he was skinny, his bare upper body was well defined. In his hand was a hammer larger than his head. In his other hand, he held the formation disc that Feng Wujiang took from Lu Yi. He activated both his divine will and spirit treasure to sense the structure of the disc. The skinny old man's name was Ouyangzi. He wasn't a sect leader. 300 years ago, he was the head refiner of the Tianji Business Alliance. He had refined countless spirit treasures in his life. Not only did he come from the Tianji Business Alliance, but many of the refiners gathered here were also from the Tianji Business Alliance. Although they were all powerful, they had never fought with others. After a long time, Ouyangzi opened his eyes with a serious expression. Feng Wujiang immediately asked, "Senior, can this be refined in large quantities?" Ouyangzi looked at him and weighed the hammer in his hand. He silently estimated the difference in strength between him and Feng Wujiang and gave up on hammering his head. He frowned and said, "Where did the sacred lord find this thing? How could such a thing be refined in large quantities?" In the entire workshop, he was probably the only one who had the ability to refine such a thing. And the success rate was very, very small. "What's wrong?" Feng Wujiang noticed that something was wrong with Ouyang expression. The method used to refine this disc is a bit immature, but it can be seen that it has been passed down from generation to generation. The refiner must have been taught by a great master. But what puzzles this old man is that this kind of refining technique shouldn't have been able to imprint such a complicated spirit inscription on the disc. Ouyang had spent his entire life refining artifacts, so his eyes were naturally sharp. Lu Ye's refining technique was indeed immature. In his eyes, such a disc array was a defective product with many flaws, but it was still something that could be used. Judging from the refining technique, the refiner must have been taught by a very powerful refiner. But the key to this object wasn't the disc itself, but the spirit inscription on it. He had been shocked by the complexity and precision of the spirit inscription just now. He had never seen or heard of such a spirit inscription before, so he didn't know what it was used for. If he simply had to use his spirit chi to construct the spirit inscription, he had a conservative estimate of a 30% chance of success. But if he had to imprint the spirit inscription on the disc at the same time as he was refining artifacts, he wouldn't even have a 5% chance of success. It was almost impossible. "Who refined this disc?" Ouyang asked. In the sacred land, there shouldn't be anyone who could refine it, so he couldn't help but be curious. "My junior brother refined it." The sacred lord's junior brother? Ouyang was confused. He had never heard of the sacred lord having a junior brother. "He's from the 9 states. Ouyang suddenly understood. Did the 9 states Tianji send someone here again? And at this time, he couldn't help but think of many things. Your junior brother is very skilled in refining artifacts. If it's convenient, could the sacred lord take this old man to see him? I have some things to ask him." He mainly wanted to see with his own eyes how the sacred lord's junior brother had successfully imprinted the spirit inscription on the disc. Feng Wujiang was surprised. "Senior, if you want to see him, I'll bring him here later. You can teach him a thing or two." It was somewhat inconceivable. One had to know that in the Tao of artifact refining, Ouyang was already the most powerful person he had ever seen. In this Tao, Ouyang was also very proud of himself, and he had never heard of him asking for advice from anyone. "Senior, can't this be mass-produced?" Feng Wujiang asked again. He felt something unusual from Ouyang tone. Ouyang couldn't help but weigh the hammer in his hand. "I can't refine this thing, let alone mass-produce it." Feng Wujiang was stunned. "Even senior can't refine it?" Ouyang said, "It's easy to refine a disc, but I can't imprint the spirit inscription on it. It was too complicated. He had to spend a lot of time studying it. Even so, it didn't increase the success rate by much." Feng Wujiang frowned as he walked out of the workshop. "That's not right. Junior brother clearly said that it wasn't difficult to refine this thing. Why did senior Ouyang say that he couldn't refine it? It didn't make sense that his junior brother's artifact refining skills were inferior to Ouyang It had to be better." He wanted to ask about it now, but considering that Lu Yi had rushed all the way here and was probably resting, there was no need to rush. It wasn't until the next day that Lu Yi suddenly remembered that he was missing someone. He hurriedly went down the mountain to look for him. He saw Dao 13 standing there motionlessly. Sensing Lu Ye's aura, Dao 13 immediately looked over with a resentful expression. Lu Yi gave him a look, and Dao Shisan followed closely behind. When he returned to the mountain, he didn't know how to find eldest senior brother. There weren't many buildings on the mountain peak. There were only a few big buildings and a few side rooms. It seemed that the cultivators from the 9 states didn't live here. The azure-robed man from yesterday was still there. Lu Yi went up and asked, "Where's the sacred lord?" The azure-robed man replied, "The sacred lord went to the surrounding islands to investigate the fortifications. Before he left, he said that if you're well rested, you should wait for him on the mountain." Chapter 1034. Strike 010 got into the car and started to wander around the holy mountain. There were only a few big buildings here. There were only a few rooms in the hall. He could see everything at a glance. However, he was new here and couldn't run around casually. He could only pass the time like this. As he passed by a large hall, Lu Yi casually glanced at it and suddenly stopped. Then he strode into the hall. The hall was empty. There was only a pillar-shaped object standing in the middle of the hall. The 10 spirits elite cultivators excitedly came in front of the pillar-shaped object, their faces filled with nostalgia. It had been a long time since he had seen this thing. The creatures of the blood refinement realm might not recognize the object in front of them, but for the cultivators from the 9 regions, who didn't know? It was a pillar of heaven's secrets. In fact, after coming to the blood refinement realm, Lu Yi was thinking about the purpose of the 9 regions' heavenly secrets to send him here. He was also thinking about how to return to the 9 regions. He couldn't stay here forever. Since the heavenly secrets could send him here, there must be a way. Let him go back. However, the situation this time was different from the last time he entered the Wuxia continent. When he entered the Wuxia continent, he carried 4 divine pillars with him. With the divine pillars, he could contact the 9 regions. However, he didn't expect that there would be one on the holy mountain. With the divine pillar, why would he need to worry about how to go back? With the help of the divine pillar, he could complete the teleportation. He could buy some cultivation materials from the divine treasure house. Recently, he lacked cultivation materials. This was also the main reason why his cultivation progress was slow. He raised his hand and pressed on the divine pillar. His mind surged and connected to the divine pillar. Lu Yi frowned. There was no reaction. He connected again, but there was still no reaction. This was the first time he had encountered something like this. Every cultivator of the 9 regions had the ability to connect to the divine pillar. It was also the right given to the cultivators of the 9 regions by the divine pillar. There was no reason for there to be no reaction. However, Lu Yi tried several times, but it was still useless. Junior brother. Feng Wujiang's voice came from behind. Lu Yi turned his head and asked Jejun, eldest senior brother, why can't you use the divine pillar? Feng Wujiang explained, Junior brother, you may not know this, but this place is not like the 9 prefectures. The Tianji pillar here can only be activated once every 5 years, and it will last for about the time it takes to brew a cup of tea. After that, a large amount of resources will be sent over from the 9 prefectures. After that, it will be in a state of silence. Lu Yi couldn't help being stunned. He hadn't expected this to be the case. Previously, he was still wondering how human cultivators could cultivate in the blood refining realm if there were no suitable materials for human cultivators to cultivate, such as spirit stones and the like. After all, he couldn't completely rely on absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It turned out that the 9 prefectures would send resources here. There's still about a year before the next activation of the Tianji pillar. Naturally, you can't use it now. Why is this happening? Lu Yi was puzzled. I don't know the specific reason, but I guess it's probably related to the will of heaven and earth in this world. When the 9 regions Tianji sent us here, they did some concealment to prevent the will of heaven and earth in this world from detecting our invasion. The Tianji pillar's Rongma is probably the same. If it remains open all year round, the will of heaven and earth in this world will be able to trace the existence of the 9 regions in reverse. That's why it's activated once every 5 years, and the duration of each activation is not too long. Lu Yi looked pensive. Junior martial brother, what do you want to buy? Feng Wujiang asked. I'm short on cultivation resources, so I wanted to exchange for some. Feng Wujiang smiled. If that's the case, I'll give you some. I'll send some over to you. There are still some leftovers from the last batch. Okay. Lu Yi nodded. Then he asked, by the way, senior martial brother, do the sacred ground have blood crystals? Yes, junior martial brother wants those. In the past few decades, the blood race army had besieged the sacred ground several times. The number wasn't small. Xuetzi Yuquan Fuhai had died. Xing Shuodayan's body had been destroyed in year X6. However, some of the blood race had also died in the outer islands. The blood crystals of the blood race had been taken out and collected by human cultivators. Originally, The sacred ground wanted to study how to use the energy of the blood crystals to set up a formation. However, the energy in the blood crystals was also somewhat corrosive. It wasn't appropriate to use them to set up a formation, so they kept them. After every battle, the sacred ground would collect a large number of blood crystals. However, they couldn't use them, so they collected more and more blood crystals. Now, the sacred ground had a special warehouse used to store blood crystals. Blood crystals of different sizes and qualities could be said to be piled up like a mountain. XN said that grade O was a dying pill, but to him, it was a good pill. As long as he had enough blood crystals, he would be able to break through to the true lake realm and break through to the divine sea realm. I'll have someone send them to you later. Feng Wujiang said and called out, "Follow me, there's someone who wants to see you." Lu Yi followed behind Feng Wujiang. After a while, Lu Yi met Ouyang Zi in the artifact refining workshop. Feng Wujiang introduced them to each other. After learning that Ouyang Zi was the chief artifact refining master of the Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance several hundred years ago, Lu Yi was filled with respect. The Heavenly Secret Commerce Alliance was a colossus with many talents under its banner. For Ouyang Zi to become the chief artifact refining master, his artifact refining level was naturally extremely high. It wasn't something that a dabbler like him could compare to. In the end, he had only studied the artifact refining Dao with Kong Kong for 2 months in the Sword Artifact Sex sealed world. Even if he had some talent in this field, it was impossible for him to have high attainments in artifact refining without years of immersion. Ouyang Zi was even more surprised, mainly because Lu Yi was too young. Yesterday, when he heard Feng Wujiang say that the twin spirit-connected spirit array was refined by his junior brother, Ouyang Zi thought that since he was Feng Wujiang's junior brother, he should be in his early 50s. But the young man in front of him was clearly in his early 20s. "You refined this thing?" Ouyang Zi held the array plate in his hand, his eyes still a little red. It seemed that he didn't rest well yesterday. "Junior refined it." Lu Yi nodded. "Refine another one for me to see." Ouyang Zi had a look of disbelief, mainly because he couldn't believe it. At Lu Ye's age, even if he started learning the artifact refining Dao in his mother's womb, it was impossible for him to completely brand such complex spirit inscriptions into an array plate. Lu Yi turned his head to look at Feng Wujiang, who nodded, "Junior brother, please refine one." Since eldest senior brother had spoken, Lu Yi naturally wouldn't refuse, taking out some materials from his storage space and condensing his spirit chi into a flame, which he then used to refine them. With his current True Lake Realm 8th Order cultivation, he could already refine some simple artifacts out of thin air, which was how he had refined the previous array plate. Under his control, the impurities were constantly separated and the prototype of an array plate slowly appeared. After a short while, Lu Yi withdrew his spirit chi and a brand new twin spirit-connected spirit array was produced. He handed it to Ouyang Zi. Ouyang Zi took it and used his spirit chi and divine sense to investigate its interior, a look of disbelief appearing on his face as he muttered, "This doesn't make sense." He had seen Lu Ye's refining technique and felt that it was really immature. In terms of quality, the array plate in his hand was barely passable. How could such artifact refining skills be able to completely brand such complex spirit inscriptions into it? Such an array plate was really a bit shabby on the outside but with a golden interior. It didn't look special from the outside, but all the good stuff was inside. Lu Yi knew why he was surprised, so he explained, "Senior, I am a spirit tattooist. Constructing spirit inscriptions is nothing to me." Even though he said so, Ouyang Zi still had a look of amazement on his face. "It's really amazing." He had seen spiritual tattooists before, but none of the spiritual tattooists he had seen had such a bizarre ability. "Little friend, can you teach this old man the construction of this spirit inscriptions?" Ouyang Zi's attitude was clearly much more polite. Although he could sense the complete structure of the linked chi spirit rune through his spiritual sense and spiritual energy, the difficulty of constructing a spirit rune was different. He wanted to know how Lu Yi constructed this spirit rune and learn a thing or two from it. Perhaps he would be able to gain something. He had studied this array plate for a whole day yesterday, so he naturally knew the magical uses of this array plate. It could be said that this thing was a killing weapon in a large-scale battle and would play an irreplaceable role in the Holy Land's defense against the Blood Race army. He naturally wanted to refine this item himself and let the human cultivators in the Holy Land be equipped with it. No problem. Lu Yi agreed immediately. Then the old man and the young man gathered together and chatted. Lu Yi would occasionally show Ouyang the construction of the spirit inscriptions. Feng Wujiang stood at the side and waited silently. Dao Shisan stood beside him like a wooden pillar. A few hours later, Feng Wujiang led Lu Yi out of the crafting workshop, leaving behind Ouyang, whose face was full of bitterness and hatred. He realized that Lu Yi constructed the spirit inscriptions as easily as eating and drinking. However, when it was his turn, he kept making mistakes and would often make mistakes. This was how spirit inscriptions were constructed. In order to successfully construct a spirit inscriptions, there couldn't be the slightest mistake in the entire process. Even the slightest mistake in yin and yang would cause the entire spirit inscriptions to collapse. This was also the reason why there were so few spirit tattooists in the 9 provinces. Formation masters, refiners, and even alchemists of UU3 were semi-proficient in the construction of spirit inscriptions. It was convenient for them to set up formations, refine weapons, or refine pills. However, spirit tattoos were a very specific field of expertise, and they would construct the spirit tattoos they used most often. They weren't like spirit tattooists, who could easily construct any type of spirit tattoo. As for Senior Ying, I probably can't count on him. Feng Wujiang also saw some things. In the way of weapon refinement, Ouyang was second to none. Even in the current 9 provinces, there weren't many who could compare to him in terms of weapon refinement. However, everyone had their own specialties, and the extremely complicated spirit pattern of the same spirit pattern was undoubtedly an insurmountable hurdle for Ouyang. Perhaps in the future, he could slowly practice to increase the success rate of this spirit inscriptions and use it in refining weapons. However, the Holy Land lacked time. Within 2 months, the Blood Race army would invade. It was useless to count on Ouyang. Chapter 1035. Junior brother, can you be in charge of refining that formation plate? Feng Wujiang asked. No problem, that's what I was thinking. Okay, I'll get someone to send the materials to you later. Feng Wujiang was overjoyed. Just now, he had seen Lu Yi forge the formation plate effortlessly. He didn't even need to spend much effort to forge one formation plate. In this way, he would be able to forge at least 200 formation plates in a day. There was enough time. Feng Wujiang walked in another direction. Soon, they arrived at a cave at the foot of the holy mountain. There were a few cultivators there. When they saw Feng Wujiang, they all bowed. Holy Master! Feng Wujiang nodded his head and led Lu Yi inside. At first, they went straight ahead, and then they looked at Madanji 1R. They went deep into the ground and came to a huge place. Inside the cave, there were flickering flames around the cave. It wasn't dark at all. Lu Yi looked around and saw that every gate in the cave had a large water tank-like container placed in front of it. A water tank. There were also round things in the tanks. At first, he didn't see what those round things were, but when he focused his vision, he was slightly shocked. Senior brother, these are Dao soldiers. Feng Wujiang stood beside Lu Yi with his hands behind his back and replied softly. So many. Lu Yi exclaimed. There were nearly 100 water vats in the cave, and the round objects he saw were actually heads. More importantly, there were long and pointed ears on both sides of those heads. These Dao soldiers were clearly not humans, but blood kindred. In the past few decades, the Holy Land and the blood kindred had fought several times. Each time, the blood kindred suffered heavy losses. Naturally, many blood kindred were captured by the Holy Land. The captured blood kindred were all refined into Dao soldiers by Feng Wujiang, which was what Lu Yi saw. He had obtained the refining method of Dao soldiers from somewhere in the 9 states back then. Tai Shan also knew how to refine Dao soldiers from him. If Tai Shan could refine Dao soldiers, he could too. It was just that back then, he felt that things like Dao soldiers were too harmful, so he never refined them. However, he was clearly not a pedantic person who didn't know how to be flexible. Using humans to refine Dao soldiers was harmful, but using blood kindred to refine them was no problem. He had selected many of the blood clan members who had been captured alive over the years with decent aptitudes to refine Dao weapons. However, the casualty rate of refining Dao soldiers was ridiculously high. The birth of a Dao soldier was less than 1 in 100. Over the past few decades, only 100 Dao soldiers had been born. Lu Yi went to the nearest water tank to investigate and found that it was filled with a strange liquid. There was a thick medicinal fragrance, and she had no idea how it had been concocted. A vampire was sitting inside with his eyes closed, and only his head was above the water. His breathing was almost non-existent, but Lu Yi could sense that he was not dead. These are all considered finished Dao soldiers. However, because they are members of the blood clan, although they were successfully refined, they were born with a rebellious nature. Under normal circumstances, there wouldn't be too much of a problem. However, if they were attacked or suffered too much pain, it is very likely that they would betray the blood clan. They cannot be used in battle, so they have been sealed here. Lu Yi immediately reacted, "Senior martial brother wants me to enslave them?" Feng Wujiang nodded. "I originally thought that these Dao soldiers would not be of much use, but since junior martial brother has the ability to control people's minds, perhaps I can give them to you." Yesterday, when he heard that Lu Yi had such a method, Feng Wujiang immediately thought of these sealed Dao soldiers. It was a pity that these Dao soldiers could not be used because of some concerns. "No problem," Lu Yi agreed readily. "However, junior martial brother, are you sure this method will work on these blood clan members? You can't be careless about this. Every Dao soldier here has a higher cultivation than you. If they betray their master, it won't be a joke." "They are all in the Divine Sea realm?" Lu Yi was shocked. Feng Wujiang nodded. "They are all in the Divine Sea realm." The blood clan members he had selected were all very suitable for refining Dao soldiers. They also had secret arts to catalyze and squeeze out their potential. It was not a problem for them to reach the Divine Sea realm after a few decades. However, the price was that these Dao soldiers' intelligence was damaged, and there was no possibility for them to improve anymore, just like Dao 13. Lu Yi raised his eyes and looked around. Hundreds of Dao soldiers meant hundreds of Divine Sea realm cultivators. Even if these Dao soldiers were not high in the Divine Sea realm, a Divine Sea realm cultivator was still a Divine Sea realm cultivator. Such a force would definitely be of great help to the Blue Blood Holy Land. That's why I have to be sure that Junior Martial Brothers' method is correct. "Absolutely not," Lu Yi promised. "Senior Martial Brother may not know, but my method is actually a divine rune. If it is a Divine Sea realm cultivator with normal intelligence, there may be a chance it will betray their master, but against these Dao soldiers with damaged intelligence, it has absolute control and suppression." "Divine rune?" Feng Wujiang was surprised. "Isn't that?" Although he was not a spirit tattoo master, he still knew what a divine rune was. It could only be constructed by one's divine sense. Lu Yi was clearly just a true lake realm cultivator. Halfway through his words, Feng Wujiang felt a divine sense spread out from Lu Yi. "Junior martial brother, you actually have divine sense." Feng Wujiang was really shocked this time. Even he had never seen such a bizarre thing. How could a true lake realm cultivator develop divine sense? Even if his junior martial brother was already a true lake realm 8th order cultivator, there was no precedent in this world for a true lake realm cultivator to develop a soul body. "I once had a chance to obtain a lot of soul cleansing water. After consuming it for a long time, my soul became stronger. Later on, by chance, I developed a soul body and developed divine sense." There was no need to hide too much in front of his eldest senior martial brother. Moreover, his second senior martial sister and Yan Yuxian also knew about this. Moreover, his eldest senior martial brother would be able to sense it when he used some method to enslave these Dao soldiers. Feng Wujiang did not know what to say. He thought that his life experience was bizarre enough, but he did not expect Lu Yi to be even more bizarre. Calming himself down, Feng Wujiang said, "Then let me see Junior Martial Brother's method." Lu Yi smiled and raised his hand to touch the Dao soldier's forehead, urging it with his divine sense. The Dao soldier was in a deep sleep. It was obviously Feng Wujiang's method. It was similar to yesterday when he made Dao 13 lose his ability to move and fall into a deep sleep. Naturally, there was no resistance to Lu Ye's method. In addition, the Dao soldier's intelligence was lacking, so the soul manipulation technique was successfully constructed. After a few breaths of time, Lu Yi withdrew his hand. Feng Wujiang turned to look at him, a look of inquiry on his face. Lu Yi said, "That's enough. Senior martial brother, wake him up." Feng Wujiang walked behind the Dao soldier and pressed his hand to the back of the Dao soldier's head. It was unknown what he did, but as he activated his spiritual power, the sleeping Dao soldier suddenly woke up. In the dim environment, the Dao soldier's eyes were like two rays of blood-red light. He then stood up, his spiritual power surging uncontrollably. The large vat he was in shattered, and the medicinal liquid inside flowed all over the ground. Feng Wujiang watched silently, waiting for the Dao soldier to make any inappropriate movements. He would immediately attack and kill him. However, the Dao soldier only glanced left and right before obediently standing in front of Lu Yi. He lowered his head, looking very respectful. The chaotic spiritual power in his body also slowly calmed down. After confirming that there were no problems with the Dao soldier, Feng Wujiang finally relaxed. Lu Yi had already walked towards the other vat, following the same pattern. Walking down the road, all person all one, a sleeping Dao soldier awoke. From start to finish, it took less than half an hour. Lu Yi had planted the soul-controlling divine soul in all of them. Almost every Dao soldier would be a little confused on the first day they woke up. This was the aftereffect of meditating on the stone blade for a long time. They would instinctively move. Instinctively. In comparison, their cultivations were very clear to Lu Yi. Eldest senior brother was right. These Dao soldiers were all at the soul-stabilizing sea realm, none below the divine sea realm. Their cultivation levels were also very average, basically concentrated between the second order and fourth order divine sea realm. There were very few fifth order, only 5. Dao 13 was also at the fifth order divine sea realm. From this point of view, although this method of refining Dao soldiers was useful, it had too many flaws and the failure rate was extremely high. Failure meant death. This could be seen from the number of Dao soldiers in front of him. Although Lu Yi didn't know how many blood race cultivators Feng Wujiang had captured over the years, standing in front of him, there were only 100 or so. These Dao soldiers will be handed over to junior brother in the future, Feng Wujiang said. Senior brother can rest assured, I will make sure they display their worth. Let's go. The 3 of them came in, but when they left, it was a mighty group. Feng Wujiang still had something to do, so he left first. Lu Yi led a large group of blood race cultivators back to the top of the holy mountain, startling the blue-robed servant, who subconsciously thought that the blood race had invaded. In the room, the blue-robed servant trembled as he walked in. I'm holding a robe in my hand. Yuan, this is what the Holy Master ordered me to give to you. Lu Yi reached out and took it. Thank you for your hard work. It's no trouble. The blue-robed servant squeezed out a smile and bolted out, disappearing in a puff of smoke. There was no other way. There were hundreds of blood-race divine sea realm cultivators standing in front of Lu Ye's door, all of them silent and gloomy, which was a bit scary. In the room, Lu Yi checked the contents of the storage bags. 2 of them were filled with various materials for refining array discs, while the other 2 were filled with blood crystals. Lu Yi poured out one of the bags of blood crystals, which immediately piled up into a small mountain beside him. Looking at these blood crystals, Lu Yi let out a long sigh. Now, he didn't lack the resources to break through to the 9th order true lake realm. Not only were there a lot of blood crystals, but their quality was also good. Lu Yi picked up one of them and felt the surging energy contained in it. He immediately concluded that this was a blood crystal of a blood race cultivator of the divine sea realm. He had never obtained a blood crystal of a blood race cultivator of the divine sea realm. There were many blood race cultivators who died in the islands around the Holy Land, so naturally, there was no lack of divine sea realm cultivators. He directly threw it into his mouth and chewed. It still had the same texture, crunchy but tasteless. Feeling the energy in the blood crystal, Lu Yi was extremely satisfied. He directly jumped up and sat on the hill-like blood crystal, urging the power of his talent tree. Invisible roots stretched out and probed into the blood crystal beside him, devouring it to its heart's content. Chapter 1036. Over the next few days, Lu Yi activated the power of his talent tree to devour blood crystals while refining array discs. Almost every day, there were nearly 200 formation discs being refined. Feng Wujiang would come to him every 2 days to take away the array discs he refined. Even though he stayed in his room all the time, Lu Yi still felt a sense of urgency. He knew that there wasn't much time left for the Holy Land. The Blood Race's army of over 1 million was definitely on the way, and it wouldn't be long before they reached the city gates. At that time, the Holy Land's survival would be decided in a single day. A month passed in the blink of an eye. During this period of time, Lu Yelu had continuously refined more than 5,000 to 6,000 formation discs, and the number of blood crystals he had devoured was incalculable. He didn't need to continue refining array discs because he already had enough. Now, he could fully immerse himself in his cultivation. Another 10 days passed, and the spiritual energy in his body became even purer. After 9 revolutions of spiritual energy, an invisible wave of air swept out, and Lu Yi slowly opened his eyes. True Lake Realm 9th Order. He was only 1 step away from the Spirit Sea Realm. There wasn't much time left for him to cultivate to the Spirit Sea Realm. Moreover, the war with the blood race was about to begin, so he didn't have the mood to continue cultivating. He didn't get up immediately and instead spent 2 days consolidating his cultivation. Then he walked out of the room and found the blue-clothed attendant who had been staying on the holy mountain. He asked him to find some materials for him. The blue-clothed attendant naturally obeyed. The reason he stayed here was because he received Feng Wujiang's order to satisfy all of Lu Ye's needs. 2 hours later, the blue-clothed attendant brought all the materials Lu Yi needed and Lu Yi began to refine them. The blue-clothed attendant was curious and asked, "Sir, what are you doing?" Lu Yi explained, "For tattooing." "Tattooing?" The blue-clothed attendant was puzzled. "What was that?" "You'll know when you see it." Lu Yi didn't explain and asked casually, "What's the situation of the enemy?" The blue-clothed attendant's expression turned serious. "I heard from the Holy Master that the Blood Race's army has begun to cross the Divine Gate Sea. They will attack us in 6 or 7 days. Lu Yi nodded. There was still enough time. Half a day later, all the materials were mixed. Lu Yi waved at Dao 13, who was standing at the side, and Dao 13 walked over obediently. "Take off your shirt and lie down." Lu Yi pointed at the wooden bed in front of him. Dao 13 did as he was told. When everything was ready, Lu Yi took out the set of needles given to him by his master and began to inscribe spirit marks on Dao Shirsan's body. Naturally, it was the twin chi-connected branch spirit tattoo. Although he already had the kindred chi connection array disc, he only needed to be within the range of the array disc's power to connect with his companion's auras and easily form an array. However, there was a drawback to this, and that was that the disc array could be seized by the enemy and used by the enemy. Moreover, in the midst of a great battle, once the formation plate was shattered, the formation would collapse without the need to attack. After all, the formation plate itself was not something particularly sturdy. However, it was a different story if it was tattooed. There was absolutely no possibility of it being seized or broken unless the owner died. Lu Yi planned to inscribe the twin chi-connected branch spirit tattoo on Dao Shirsan and his blood slaves. This way, they could replace the formation plate. It could also be said that each of them was a formation plate that could connect with other people's auras at will. It could even be said that if these soul slaves were scattered among the human cultivators, they could also replace the formation plate. At a critical moment, they might be able to play a miraculous role. It had been a long time since Lu Yi studied the Tao of Inscription. The last time he studied it was when he was in the spiritual land of Huitian Valley in the Cloud River battlefield. Ever since he embarked on the path of cultivation, with the Tao of Inscription as his foundation, he had come into contact with too many outer Tao, such as the Tao of formation, the Tao of inscription, the Tao of refining, and so on. He might come into contact with more in the future, but a person's energy was limited. Naturally, it was impossible for him to be proficient in everything. The only result of being proficient in everything was that he was proficient in everything. Cultivation was what he needed to do the most. Perhaps one day, when his cultivation base could no longer improve, he would study more outer Tao. However, that was not the case now. Although his attainment in the Tao of inscription was sloppy, it was not too difficult for him to inscribe thanks to the talent tree. Otherwise, he would not have chosen Tao Shisan as his first target. The servant in green stood at the side and watched as Lu Ye's hand danced in the air. The Tao of inscription gradually formed a complicated inscription diagram on Tao Shisan's chest. He could not help but gasp in amazement. Not long after, Tao Shisan stood up and put on his clothes again. Lu Yi summoned another Blood Clan soul slave and did the same thing. Not all the Blood Clan soul slaves were inscribed on their chests. Some of them were female, so they could only choose to inscribe on their backs. The uneven chests would also affect the performance of his Tao of inscription. It took Lu Yi 2 days to inscribe all the Blood Clan soul slaves. Then he began to train them. The so-called training was nothing more than letting them familiarize themselves with the evolution of the formation. Lu Yi had long since obtained many practice methods of formations from his eldest senior brother in preparation for today. There was the Black Tortoise Moon-gazing formation that leaned towards defense, the White Tiger Heaven-smashing formation that leaned towards killing, and the Azure Dragon's 7 Mansions formation that was unpredictable. The names of these formations sounded very powerful. It seemed that the effects would not be too bad in a real battle. Moreover, depending on the number of people, the formation would be different. If there were only 2 people, they could form the 2 dragons emerging from the water formation. Above that, there was the Heaven and Earth tripartite formation, the level 4 Tusita formation, and the 9 palace chain formation with 9 people. The 9 states Tianji had sent many people to the blood refinement realm over the past few hundred years. Each of them was knowledgeable and experienced. These formations were provided by the old seniors and included at least 1,000 years' worth of essence in the 9 states. Under normal circumstances, it was basically an impossible task to familiarize oneself with the changes of a formation in such a short time, even if the people forming the formation were familiar with each other. Not to mention, Dao Bing, who had a lack of intelligence, would never be able to understand what a formation was. However, with the help of kindred spirit, the Dao soldier's practice was actually quite good. The most difficult thing for a cultivator to form a formation was to connect their qi. Everyone's qi was different. If they wanted to connect their qi, they had to accommodate and fit together, just like the yin and yang in the construction of the inscription diagram. Every spiritual pattern was formed by combining countless yin and yang elements in different ways. Only then could it form a whole. The twin qi shared branch spirit tattoo had perfectly resolved this greatest difficulty, and the rest was naturally easy. After practicing for several days, Lu Yi led a group of Dao Bing and valiantly flew out of the sacred mountain. After asking for the location of the eldest senior brother, Lu Yi rushed there. After a while, he saw the figure of the eldest senior brother on a small island in the periphery. There was a city on the small island, but it was not used for people to live. All the humans in the sacred mountain were gathered on the large island in the center. The small islands in the periphery and even the cities on the islands were just defensive structures. Many human cultivators in the city were busy making the final preparations before the battle. Feng Wujiang stood on the city wall. There were at least 70 to 80 people around him, either sitting or standing. The eldest senior brother was obviously assigning the defense tasks. At this moment, those who were qualified to stand beside him were all top cultivators from the 9 states. After decades of development, although there were many Divine Sea Realm cultivators, their cultivation was not too high and they were not qualified to attend such an occasion. When Lu Yi arrived, many pairs of eyes immediately looked over. There was no pressure, but Lu Yi still felt the pressure as heavy as a mountain. Looking up, he saw that almost all of these people had snow-white hair and beards. There were few middle-aged people. On the other hand, There were a few female cultivators who maintained themselves like Yuji. They looked youthful and beautiful. Mixed in such a group of people, they really stood out from the crowd. Lu Yi saw Jianghu Hong, Wu Chang, Meng Jie, and Granny Jiao in the crowd. When he landed, a large group of Dao Bing also landed behind him. They all had dull expressions and dull eyes. In comparison, Dao 13 was undoubtedly more normal. "Sacred Lord, this is your mysterious junior brother?" a white-haired old man asked. The others looked up and down at Lu Yi with interest. Feng Wujiang laughed and put his arm around Lu Ye's shoulder affectionately. "Yes, this is my junior brother. Seniors, what do you think? The new generation surpasses the old, right?" Lu Yi hurriedly bowed. Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect of the War State greets the seniors. His attitude was extremely respectful. It couldn't be helped. The people here were all real seniors. Every one of them was a hero in their own era. They were people who stirred up the 9 regions. Regardless of whether they were from the Haotian Alliance or the Myriad Demons Ridge, they were all on the same side. Lu Yi actually liked this kind of atmosphere. Everyone worked together for the same goal, and there was no misunderstanding between them. Unlike in the 9 states, even if they were from the same camp, there were many open and secret struggles. There was no personal enmity between the Z arts of the different camps. It was just that there was conflict between camps. There was a reason to fight. The white-haired old man stroked his beard and smiled. There are indeed talents in every generation. Lu Ye's 9th Order True Lake Realm Cultivation was among them. The people who don't buy it don't count as 1TA2. Who doesn't know the methods that Lu Yi has shown? Who didn't know? Originally, the Holy Land didn't have much confidence in the Blood Race's encirclement because the limited information they received showed that the Blood Race's troops this time were far stronger than before. Moreover, there were many Blood Race masters hidden in the army, and there must be a lot of Saint Seeds among them. Obviously, the Blood Race also knew that as long as they broke through the Holy Land's outer defensive line, they would have a chance to remove this cancer from the Divine Gate C. For this reason, the Blood Race had put in a lot of effort. This caused the Jade Blood Holy Land's chances of winning to be very low. Before Lu Yi appeared, the seniors of the Holy Land were even divided into 2 factions. One of them wanted to bring the current human cultivators out of the Divine Gate C and find another place to settle down. However, this was too difficult, so it didn't happen. After all, this was the blood refining world, and the Blood Race was in charge. Feng Wujiang was lucky to find the Divine Gate C and establish the Jade Blood Holy Land. There was no other Divine Gate C in this world that could provide the Jade Blood Holy Land with such favorable terrain. Chapter 1037. In the end, it was Feng Wujiang who decided to stay behind and guard the Jade Blood Sacred Land. It wasn't that they wanted to live and die with the Jade Blood Sacred Land, but if they ran away without even fighting, it would damage the reputation of these old seniors. Besides, even if the Blood Race really did have the power to attack the Jade Blood Sacred Land, they still had a good chance of fighting their way out. Just as the Holy Land was preparing for the war, Lu Yi arrived. He brought the Twin Qi Binding Formation Disc, which increased the Sacred Land's overall strength by 30%. Not to mention, he also had the ability to control the sealed Blood Race Dao soldiers. Lu Yi had been busy these past few days and didn't have much interaction with the outside world. However, the old seniors of the 9 states had been secretly watching him. Now that they were in front of him, they naturally sized him up. "Everyone, let's act according to our previous arrangements," Feng Wujiang instructed. The old seniors didn't say anything else. They activated their spiritual power and flew out in all directions. Only Feng Wujiang, Meng Jie, and Yu Ji stayed behind. "Senior brother, what do I need to do?" Lu Yi asked. Feng Wujiang said, "There are 11 islands around the sacred land that form a defensive line. This line of defense cannot be broken, or the sacred land will be lost. Junior brother, I want you to stay on this island and work with Senior Meng Jie and Senior Yu Ji to protect this island." Lu Yi nodded. "No problem." After a pause, he asked, "What are our chances of winning?" Feng Wujiang smiled. "Everything depends on effort. We'll know after we fight. He patted Lu Ye's shoulder and flew into the sky. He was probably going to do his final patrol. Lu Yi watched him leave, then turned to Meng Jie and Yu Ji. I'll have to rely on you two seniors for this battle. Yu Ji smiled. Meng Jie and I are only two people. You'll be the main defensive force in this battle. This is also why your senior brother arranged for you to stay here. But don't be too nervous. If any powerful blood race appears, Meng Jie and I will take care of them. Although the two old seniors had high cultivation levels, they were too few in number. Moreover, once powerhouses like them fought, they would definitely be targeted and entangled by the powerhouses of the Blood Clan. When that time came, the main defense force would be the Blood Clan's Dao soldiers under Lu Yi. Over 100 divine sea cultivators who could form a formation at any time. No one could underestimate such a force. We have the 60% chance of winning. Yu Ji answered Lu Ye's previous question for Feng Wujiang. But it's war. There are always accidents and changes, so we can't be too sure. We just have to do our best. Currently, the Holy Land only had a 60% chance of winning. One could only imagine how low the Holy Land's chances of winning had been before Lu Ye's arrival. It wasn't that the old seniors weren't powerful enough, it was just that there were too few of them. Although the Jade Blood Holy Land had experienced several decades of development and had an extremely large number of mortals, the number of cultivators they had was still quite small. Take the small island that Lu Yi needed to guard as an example. There were only 10 to 20,000 human cultivators here. The situation on the other islands was not much different. The total number of human cultivators was around 100,000, while the blood race army numbered in the millions. Even if the defending side had the geographical advantage, it would still be difficult to make up for the huge gap in numbers. This was a war with a great disparity in military strength. Yu Ji and Meng Jie were both conserving their strength for the upcoming battle. Lu Yi had Dao Shisan watch over the blood race Dao soldiers while he patrolled the island's defenses alone. One had to admit that the logistics provided by the Kingdom of the Nine States were very good. Fierce and huge offensive weapons could be seen on every section of the city's walls. Each weapon was supported by a formation and had a different number of cultivators overseeing it. Moreover, Lu Yi keenly sensed that there were many formations set up in the city, including the Twin Qi linking formation. He had provided the Holy Land with a large number of Twin Qi linking formation discs. With these discs, any formation cultivator with a little bit of skill could easily set up a Twin Qi linking formation. It could be said that the current city was truly armed to the extreme. Lu Yi felt a bit of pity. If he had enough fire spirit stones, he could provide the Holy Land with another weapon suitable for war. However, he had already used up all the fire spirit stones he had accumulated. The blood refining realm itself didn't produce any spirit stones, so there weren't many fire spirit stones in the Kingdom of the Nine States. It was useless to think about this now. The Holy Land had already done its best. Whether they won or lost the next battle, it was all fate. Lu Yi also began to conserve his energy. He didn't know when it started, but dark clouds covered the sky and surged over at an extremely fast speed. They're here. Yu Ji's soft voice came from beside him. Lu Yi opened his eyes and looked over. At the end of his vision, dark clouds covered the sky. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the clouds. Below the clouds, there was an endless number of figures. They were either flying in the air or riding on spirit weapons. The Blood Clan didn't have much need for offensive spirit weapons. Not many Blood Clan members would use offensive spirit weapons. Their blood techniques were extremely corrosive to the spirituality of spirit weapons. However, this didn't mean that the Blood Clan didn't have flying spirit weapons. The small island that Lu Yi was in charge of guarding was located in the north of the Holy Land. In other words, he was facing the Blood Clan's northern front. It was led by Star Moon Saint. Back then, when hundreds of thousands of Blood Clan members gathered under the Star Moon Holy Land, he didn't feel much. Now that the army was pressing in, the pressure was indescribable. The Blood Clan's northern front crossed the Shunkai Sea and advanced. At the same time, Lu Yi couldn't see the armies advancing from the east, south, and west. There was no cover on the sea. Moreover, it was impossible to cover up such a large-scale march. The Blood Clan didn't need to cover up anything. If it weren't for the Jade Blood Holy Land's battle record of repelling the Blood Clan several times, many people would have lost their minds. Compared to the pressure brought by the Blood Clan's army, Lu Yi was more concerned about another matter. He sensed traces of malice surging from all directions. It was as if a pair of invisible eyes were spying on him, wanting to do something unfavorable to him. The soaring dragon realm's origin in his body was stirring. This was a phenomenon that had never happened before. Lu Yi immediately understood that the invisible malice came from the will of heaven and earth of this world. The will of heaven and earth in this world was muddled and incomplete. It was not as strong and clear as the will of the 9 continents. Previously, Lu Yi could not sense it because the heaven secrets of the 9 continents had concealed it when he was sent here. Moreover, compared to the vast blood-refining world, a true lake-stage cultivator like him was not worthy of the will of heaven and earth's attention. Fairywood's miracle, however, the situation now was different. The Blood Clan's army was pressing in and enveloping the entire blood-refining realm. This made the world's will of this world much clearer. To the Blood Clan, the Jade Blood Holy Land was a malignant tumor. The blood-refining realm was the Blood Clan's world. The world's will of this world was naturally on the Blood Clan's side. However, that was all. Unlike the 9 provinces Tianji, who could directly interfere with the actions of cultivators, the world's will of the blood-refining realm didn't have this ability. It could only instinctively create momentum for the Blood Clan's army and create some psychological pressure on the human race. Just like the dark clouds that came with the Blood Clan's army. The reason why the Soaring Dragon Realm's origin was stirring was because the Blood Realm had destroyed the Soaring Dragon Realm. It was unknown what the relationship between the Blood Realm and the Blood-refining Realm was, but the Blood Clan lived in both realms. The Soaring Dragon Realm's origin naturally had some abnormal reaction to the world's will that seemed to be related to the world's destruction. The Blood Clan's army was pressing in. On the 11 small islands, the human race was waiting in formation. The distance between them was getting closer and closer. From afar, they could hear the earth-shattering battle cries from the Blood Clan's army. The dark clouds that covered the sky also quickly advanced with the Blood Clan's army until they covered the Jade Blood Holy Land and the surrounding islands. There was no longer any light in the sky. The whole world fell into darkness. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it made people feel as if there were more than 10 quilts on their bodies. With a roar, lines quickly lit up, piercing through the oppressive darkness and turning into the brightest light in the world. It was the human cultivators who were responsible for the formation on the city wall that activated the Great Formation. In an instant, an extremely complicated formation enveloped the entire city. In the city, all the human cultivators who were standing in it trembled. They had a strange feeling. They could clearly feel that they could inject their own power into the Great Formation under their feet and let anyone in the city borrow it. At the same time, they could also extract the power injected by others from the Great Formation under their feet. The twin chi-connected Great Formation was the first to be activated. 11 small islands and 11 twin chi-connected Great Formations lit up like 11 lanterns in the vast Shinkei Sea. Buzzing sounds continued. Following closely behind the twin chi-connected Great Formation, sections of the defensive formations on the city wall were activated. Crunching sounds could be heard. Yu Ji and Meng Jie, who were standing beside Lu Yi, turned to look at Lu Yi at the same time. With one glance, the 2 elders' eyes twitched. Yu Ji couldn't believe her eyes. "What are you eating?" Lu Yi handed over the half-eaten blood crystal to her. "Senior, have some." Even though Yu Ji was experienced and knowledgeable, she couldn't help but be deeply shocked. You're fine eating this? I have a good appetite and digestion." Lu Yi smiled and swallowed the blood crystal. Her spiritual energy surged and continuously injected into the Great Formation under her feet, making it easier for the others in the Great Formation to borrow power. Yu Ji stiffly shifted her gaze away. She didn't intend to persuade her. Although Lu Yi looked old, she was still a true lake-stage cultivator. She didn't need to tell her what she could and couldn't eat. "Monster." The usually taciturn Meng Jie couldn't help but comment. He had been in the blood refinement world for so many years, but he had never seen a human who could eat blood crystals. Was she still human? He couldn't understand what kind of monsters had appeared in the 9 continents. Feng Wujiang might be ridiculously strong, but he was still within the range of a normal person. This junior martial brother of his was obviously abnormal. Suddenly, there was a violent tremor. Following that, a beam of light shot out from the city wall. That beam of light was as straight as a sword and directly blasted into the vampiric army. Everywhere it passed, the vampiric army turned into powder. The war had begun. Chapter 1038. Following the first pillar of light, the spell formations on the 11 small islands were activated one after another. In an instant, streaks of light blotted out heaven and earth as they blasted toward the enemy. The blood tribe was instantly decimated, and broken limbs and blood rained down from the sky. This wasn't the first time that the blood tribe had fought against the Jade Blood Holy Land, so they were already well prepared. In the face of such an attack, the best way to deal with it was to spread out. Even so, they still suffered heavy casualties under the concentrated attacks of the humans. However, the blood tribe didn't hesitate in the slightest, and they continued to charge forward. In the eyes of these formations were powerful magic tools that were specially used to attack cities. Through the power amplification of the formations, the power of these magic tools was much greater than that of ordinary magic tools. It was almost comparable to the explosion of a spirit treasure, even though it might not be able to destroy the world with one strike. Looking down from the sky, the oval-shaped outer islands seemed to have become a glowing hedgehog. Those flickering spikes were the power of the spell formations on the islands. Many blood tribe cultivators were reduced to a rain of blood before they could even cry out in agony. Some blood tribe cultivators who were lucky enough to survive fell into the Divine Gate Sea, and they slowly fell silent amidst their anguished cries. The Divine Gate Sea was a natural barrier, and the blood in the Sea of Blood was like a pot of boiling oil to ordinary blood tribe cultivators. Falling into the Sea of Blood was basically a matter of life and death. This was also the main reason why Feng Wujiang had chosen to set up the Jade Blood Holy Land here. Without the natural barrier of the Divine Gate Sea, the Jade Blood Holy Land would have already been drowned by the Sea of Blood tribe cultivators, even with the presence of a dozen or so elders. No blood tribe cultivator was able to get within 3,000 feet of the islands, and they were all stopped at 3,000 feet away. The number of casualties continued to increase, but the blood tribe's army was endless. Lu Yi slowly came to a realization. The vanguard of the blood tribe wasn't very powerful, and most of them were at the Cloud River tier. No matter how many blood tribe cultivators there were, they obviously wouldn't be able to do anything. However, the blood tribe clearly didn't expect these Cloud River tier cultivators to be able to attack the islands. Their only value was to wear down the human army. In other words, they were cannon fodder. Only when the human army was exhausted to a certain extent would the true backbone of the blood tribe attack. This was what the vampires had done in every major battle in the past. Hence, even though the vampires numbered in the millions, more than half of them were used as cannon fodder. The vampires were also clear that the human side's greatest weakness was their numbers. At present, the humans had no blind spots, but as long as there was enough time, the human defense would gradually weaken. For this reason, the blood race had to pay a certain price. This was something that couldn't be helped. Fortunately, it was easy for vampires to grow, so even though they suffered great losses every time, they would make a comeback after a few years. After repeated battles, the vampires had gnawed away most of the islands on the periphery of the Jade Blood Holy Land. Now, there were only 11 islands left to form a defensive line. This time, as long as they could tear a hole in this defensive line, they would have hope of destroying the Jade Blood Holy Land. Therefore, to the human race, the 11 defensive islands could not be lost. The fierce battle continued for a full 3 days and 3 nights. During this period of time, the vampires' attacks never stopped, and neither did the human islands counterattack. The 3,000-meter radius around the archipelago was the boundary between life and death. All vampires who stepped into this area died without exception. Even so, the vampires who came later still continued to advance. The vampires were undoubtedly a race that loved to fight. This was the insanity in their bones. The deaths of many of their people could not stop their determination to advance. Perhaps it was also related to the lack of corpses. All the dead vampires either turned into powder or fell into the Shunkai Sea. There was not a single corpse in sight. If the corpses were still around and piled up into a mountain, it might be able to deter the vampires to a certain extent. Unfortunately, this did not happen. On the northern battlefront, on a giant ship in the middle of the army, Saint Xingyu stood with his hands behind his back and watched quietly. He did not frown, nor did he feel any heartache. To him, those dead vampires were already done with their duty. There was no need to feel heartache. A divine ocean realm cultivator who was watching the battle from the front returned and reported, "Saint, 3 days have passed. Please give your orders." Saint Xingyu said, "Just act according to the plan." The divine ocean realm cultivator immediately retreated. At the same time, on the island's wall, Meng Jie, who had been silently watching the battle, also said, "3 days have passed." "Then let's act according to the plan," Yuji replied. Meng Jie slowly raised his hand and clenched it gently. Lu Yi looked at them in confusion. Yuji explained, "According to the rhythm of previous battles, 3 days is the time when the humans are at their weakest. After all, controlling the formation and the spirit tools in the formation eye for a long time was also a huge burden and consumption on the human cultivators. In previous battles, the first 3 days were a time point. After this point, the humans' defense would suddenly drop by a lot. And this change was the opportunity that the vampires had been waiting for. In these 3 days, the vampires suffered huge casualties, but the humans did not suffer any losses. After all the enemies were annihilated thousands of meters away. It was difficult for the humans to suffer any losses. Lu Yi immediately understood. Feigning weakness. If he hadn't brought the kindred spirit connecting formation disc to the humans of the Jade Blood Holy Land, this time point would indeed be the opportunity that the vampires had been waiting for. However, with the kindred spirit connecting formation disc, the situation was different. In these 3 days, the human cultivators in charge of controlling the fortifications had indeed consumed a lot of energy. However, they were constantly borrowing power through the kindred spirit connecting formation, so even though they had consumed a lot of energy, they were not at their weakest. Lu Yi had also eaten a large number of blood crystals in the past 3 days, and all the refined energy was injected into the formation. It wasn't just him. The hundreds of Blood Race Dao soldiers were also swallowing blood crystals, allowing the human cultivators to borrow their strength. One had to know that they were at the divine ocean realm and could provide a lot of help. Following Meng Jie's instructions, the counterattack on the island slowly decreased. They couldn't do it too obviously, or the vampires would see through them. To the humans, such a trick could only be used once, so they naturally had to maximize the effect. This was not only the case on Luya's island, but also on the other 10 islands. As time passed, the counterattack became weaker and weaker. If one were to look down from the sky, they would see that the spikes on the Jade Blood Holy Land had become much shorter and fewer. After observing for more than half a day and confirming that the human cultivators were weakened, the first counterattack of the vampires came. There were clearly many true Lake Realm vampires among the cannon fodder. They activated their own power and used the cannon fodder as cover to quickly attack the archipelago. The humans' counterattack was still there, but it was difficult to stop all the vampires' attacks. The 1,000-foot life and death line was constantly shrinking. 900 feet, 800 feet, 700 feet. In less than 4 hours, the vampires' front line had advanced to within 500 feet of the archipelago. The vampires could finally counterattack, and they were no longer sitting ducks. Rays of bloody light shot out from the vampires' camp, and as far as the eye could see, the bloody light covered the sky and covered the archipelago. The formation buzzed, and the defensive formation was activated, enveloping the archipelago. The bloody light landed on the defensive light barrier, causing specks of dark red to appear, as if they were sprinkling blood red dye on the barrier. Sizzling sounds could be heard continuously, and the defensive formation's light quickly dimmed. The vampire's blood arts were too effective against defensive formations. One had to know that the formation on the archipelago was personally set up by a senior formation cultivator, his disciples, and his disciples. Its defensive strength was not inferior to the defensive formations of the top sects in the 9 prefectures. Even so, the first layer of the defensive formation was broken in less than an hour. Although the vampires suffered many casualties during this period, the appearance of a large number of true Lake Realm vampires pushed the vampires' front line forward by another 300 feet. The second layer of the defensive formation was activated. In less than an hour, it was broken again. The vampires' front line was now 300 feet away from the archipelago. The third layer of the defensive formation enveloped the archipelago. This was also the last defensive formation on the archipelago. If it was broken, the vampire's blood arts would be able to descend on the archipelago without restraint. When that happened, all the defensive structures would be destroyed in an extremely short period of time. Once such a situation occurred, the Jade Blood Holy Land would not be far from collapse with the current strength of the vampires. Among the vampires' army, there were already divine ocean realm cultivators. Although there were not many of them, the blood arts they used were not something that true Lake Realm or Cloud River Realm cultivators could compare to, and they were more corrosive to the defensive formation. 600 feet. This was an extremely dangerous distance. The vampires' army seemed to have seen the hope of victory, and they charged forward even more ferociously. If compared to the vampires' momentum, the humans on the archipelago were clearly dispirited. The strength of their counterattack was sparse, and they were no longer as magnificent as before. In the instant that the last layer of the defensive formation was broken, the eyes of all the vampires lit up. Their speed suddenly increased, and as they ran, they rapidly prepared a series of exquisite secret techniques. Almost all of the vampires saw the destruction of the Jade Blood Holy Land and the removal of this malignant tumor. Many of them were even overjoyed. However, in the next instant, their joy turned into shock. As the formation buzzed, an earth-shattering stream of light erupted from the walls of the small island and blasted into the vampires' army without restraint. In an instant, the porcupine that was the Jade Blood Holy Land shot out the spikes that had been retracted into its body. Many of the vampires still had expressions of joy on their faces, but their bodies were badly mutilated, and they fell into the godly Watchtower Sea, kicking up waves. In that instant, death swept through the vampires' camp like a hurricane. In that instant, countless vampires died on the spot. Even the divine ocean realm cultivators had fallen. All the vampires within 500 feet of the archipelago were wiped out in an extremely short period of time, and this distance was still expanding. Most of the vampires had no idea what was going on, and they disappeared as they ran. A few vampires saw that the situation was bad and hurriedly dodged. However, they could dodge once, but they could not dodge twice or thrice. The corpses of the vampires fell like raindrops. Chapter 1039. On the northern battlefront's ship, Saint Xingyu's expression changed for the first time. Impossible! The blood race had besieged the Jade Blood Holy Land many times. They were already familiar with the humans' rhythm in their battles. 3 days was the dividing line. It was the beginning of the humans' weakening defense. This had been proven many times in the past battles. However, why was it this time? No matter how indifferent he was to the death of the cannon fodder, his expression was slightly ferocious. The death of the cannon fodder was necessary and valuable. Their deaths would whittle away the human race's strength and pave the way for future generations to retaliate. But this sudden turn of events was something none of the vampires had expected. This time, tens of thousands of his blood race subordinates had died. Since when did the humans become so resilient? He placed his large hand on the ship's railing. He exerted so much force that the railing was crushed. In an instant, Saint Xingyu was caught in a dilemma. At this moment, there were only 2 paths before him. One was to order a retreat. However, if he did that, his efforts over the past 3 days would be in vain. It would be meaningless. The second path was to continue pressuring the humans. He was betting that the humans' counterattack would not last for long and that this was just a coincidence. If he was right, there would be hope for him to destroy the Jade Blood Holy Land. If he was wrong, not many of the hundreds of thousands of Blood Race troops he brought would survive. There was not much time for him to think on the battlefield. With a ferocious expression, he shouted, "Continue!" He chose the second path. Although he did not know why his previous intelligence was wrong, he firmly believed that the humans' counterattack would not last long. They had suffered great losses. If they were to retreat in defeat, it would not make sense. Most importantly, he did not feel sorry for the deaths of his soldiers. After the order was given, the Blood Race army continued pressuring the humans. As it turned out, he had made the right bet. In less than an hour, the humans' counterattack started to weaken. This was inevitable. Even though the great formation of chi and branches enveloped the small islands, allowing the cultivators who controlled the formations on the islands to continuously borrow power without worrying about their own consumption, they could still hold on. However, the formations set up on the city walls could not hold on any longer. 3 days of continuous activation had placed a huge burden on each of the formations. Coupled with the sudden outburst of wild herring just now, many of the formations had begun to slow down. Even though a large number of formation cultivators began to walk on top of the city walls and began to repair them, it was difficult to maintain the previous power. The pressure from the Blood Kindred army reappeared, and this time, it was even faster than before. That was because the proportion of powerhouses in the Blood Kindred army had increased. They were getting closer and closer. Although the humans had the geographical advantage of defending, once the Blood Race army got too close, the human powerhouses would have to act to intercept them. The vampires must not be allowed to set foot on the island. The 11 outer islands were the Jade Blood Holy Land's last line of defense, and none of them could be destroyed. The humans knew this, and so did the vampires. Once the vampires were allowed to land on the islands, the first thing they would do would not be to kill but to destroy the islands. As long as they could destroy any island, they could tear a hole in the defensive line of the humankind. The human race had to defend against the enemy. This was a choice they had no choice but to make. 2,000 feet was the maximum distance. Any closer and they would not be able to intercept him. If they intercepted him at this distance, the defenses of the islands at the rear would provide a certain degree of assistance. With that, Meng Jie removed a string of stones from his wrist. This string of stones looked ordinary, with only 7 or 8 multicolored stones strung on it. Lu Yi had noticed it before, but he didn't pay it much attention. He only thought it was a hobby of the old senior. But now, it seemed that this was not the case. Meng Jie had removed the string of stones at this time, and it was obvious that he was about to make a move. He raised his other hand and plucked a stone bead from the string of stones. Although it was called a bead, it wasn't actually round. Instead, it was a small stone with an irregular shape. He weighed the small pebble in his hand, and like a naughty child, he threw it forward. In an instant, violent spiritual power and blood energy erupted. The invisible shockwave caused Lu Ye's clothes to flutter and his hair to fly backward. From what he could see, the sound waves behind the small stone rapidly expanded as it flew forward. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a huge stone that was as big as a house. Wherever the boulders passed, they forcibly blasted open a vacuum in the Blood Tribe army. Regardless of whether they were Cloud River tier cannon fodder, True Lake tier Blood Tribe cultivators, or Divine Sea tier Blood Tribe cultivators, they all died upon contact with the boulders. Even the rivers of blood that the Blood Tribe cultivators had channeled were sliced in half, and cries of agony rang out from within the rivers of blood. Meng Jie used both hands and threw out stones one after another. In an instant, 7 or 8 vacuum zones with him as the source lay across the battlefield. The Blood Race's casualties were innumerable. Lu Ye's eyelids twitched. He was secretly horrified. He had seen Divine Sea Realm body cultivators before. Dao 13 was a Divine Sea Realm body cultivator, but Dao 13 didn't have such terrifying means as Meng Jie. That small stone was obviously not an ordinary stone. It was more like a strange treasure. He didn't know if Meng Jie had refined it himself or obtained it from somewhere. If he had refined it himself, he could refine it in the future. If he had obtained it from somewhere, then today's might could not be replicated. No matter what, this move alone had caused the blood race to suffer heavy losses. One of the large stones was obviously aimed at the ship behind them. However, too many blood race members were killed along the way, and it was obstructed by the blood rivers. By the time it reached the ship, it had lost half of its power. On the ship, a ray of bloody light burst forth. Like an arrow, it crashed into the stone and exploded into powder. More than 10 miles away, Star Moon Saint and Meng Jie's eyes met. The former's face was gloomy, while the latter's face was indifferent. "Take care of yourself," Meng Jie said without rhyme or reason. With a leap, he charged forward single-handedly. In an instant, his spiritual energy and qi and blood erupted, causing the void to tremble. Like a tiger in a flock of sheep, he brought death wherever he went. None of the blood race's experts could withstand a single blow from him. This was the powerful foundation of the old seniors from the 9 states. It could be said that Meng Jie had walked to the extreme on the path of body cultivation. It was just that he was limited by certain reasons and couldn't take that crucial step. Almost at the same time that Meng Jie charged out, many human race practitioners on the island's city wall, who had been ready for a long time, also leaped out. They were in groups of 5 or 6 people, and there were also groups of 7 or 8 people. When they leaped out of the city wall, they didn't show any signs. However, when they leaped out, each of them activated their spiritual power and connected their qi. In an instant, their spiritual power gathered and formed different formations. Different formations had different forms of appearance. For example, the black tortoise moon-gazing formation formed a huge black tortoise that looked up at the moon. Several people in the formation stood on the black tortoise's 4 limbs, head, and back. Their spiritual power intertwined and merged, making the black tortoise look vivid and lifelike. Another example was the tiger roaring forest formation, which appeared to be a ferocious tiger that entered the mountain. When it opened its mouth to show its filial piety, the tiger's roar shook the sky. Another example was the fighting dragon sky formation, which appeared to be the shadow of a dragon that soared in the 9 heavens. The dragon's roar was loud and resounding, raising the morale. In the eyes of many blood race practitioners, the people who rushed out of the island were not the humans they were familiar with. They were like ancient vicious beasts that had broken free from their confinement. For a moment, they were dumbfounded and at a loss for what to do. The human race practitioners who had formed the formation didn't care about this. Using the power of the formation, they brazenly charged into the enemy group. In an instant, blood rained down. Lu Yi also charged out. His task this time was to cooperate with Meng Jie and Yu Ji to defend the island. He had been watching the show for several days, and now that it was finally time for him to contribute, he naturally wouldn't fall behind. The lineup on his side could be said to be luxurious. After several days of training, the hundreds of blood race Dao soldiers were already familiar with the changes in the various formations. Before the battle, Lu Yi had also made detailed arrangements, so at this moment, there was no need for him to give any orders. After the blood race Dao soldiers rushed out, they formed the formation according to the previous arrangement. Lu Ye's formation was the 9-temple array. In addition to him and Dao 13, there were 7 carefully selected blood race Dao soldiers, each of whom was at the 4th order Divine Sea realm. They plunged into a blood river that stretched across the sky. The underground blood river in the blood refining world was the foundation of the blood race. It was the hotbed for the birth of blood race blood fetuses, but the blood race could also condense their own blood river with the use of their blood techniques. Naturally, the blood river condensed in this way couldn't be compared to the real blood river, but it had many mysteries, especially when it came to trapping enemies. It was very effective. Back in Thousand Flowing Blessed Land, Dao 13 was trapped in a blood river and couldn't get out for a long time. That blood river was created by some true Lake Realm blood race cultivators. Of course, this was also related to Dao 13's low intelligence. If his intelligence was high enough, the blood river created by the true Lake Realm blood race cultivators wouldn't be able to trap him. Trapping enemies was only one aspect. The blood race cultivators hid in the blood river and were extremely difficult to find. The trapped enemy also had to be on guard against their attacks at all times. It could be said that they were extremely difficult to deal with. If Lu Yi was alone, he would never break into such a blood river. The blood river was the home ground of the blood race, so how could he play to his strengths and avoid his weaknesses? But if they were in a formation, especially with 7 blood race Dao soldiers in the formation, it didn't matter. The blood race Dao soldiers were also very familiar with the blood river. Although no one had taught them this before, the blood race was naturally proficient in all the secret techniques of their race. He led the Dao soldiers into a river of blood. Immediately, cries of shock and agony rang out. Then, corpses fell out of the river of blood and fell into the divine watchtower sea. The blood river's volume kept shrinking until it disappeared. Strictly speaking, the blood race's blood river could also be used as a formation because different blood race cultivators could fuse their blood rivers together to increase the volume of the blood river, making it easier for them to trap and kill enemies. The larger the volume of the fused blood river, the stronger the formation, but it didn't improve the blood race cultivators themselves. Chapter 1040. Therefore, this array unique to the blood race couldn't compare to the various arrays of the human race to a certain extent. Once the various arrays of the human race were activated, they would increase the strength of the people who formed them to varying degrees. After the first blood river was destroyed, Lu Yi, Dao 13, and the other Dao soldiers appeared, surrounded by a large number of blood race cultivators. The sword gourd at Lu Ye's waist vibrated and streaks of sword light shot out, accompanied by miserable screams. In such a chaotic battlefield where enemies were everywhere, a true lake stage soldier cultivator would not be of much use. Especially since the blood arts of the blood breeds had a strong corrosive effect on spiritual weapons. Among the saber arts he could use, only the crescent moon was suitable for such a battlefield. However, crescent moon consumed a lot of energy, so Lu Yi didn't use his saber and took out the sword gourd instead. There was a large amount of sword chi sealed inside the sword gourd, which was suitable for the current situation. Not all members of the blood race were able to conjure their own blood river. This was an ability that only members of the true lake stage possessed. Those of the cloud river stage were unable to do so. They could only conjure a blood fog to envelop themselves. While the sword chi in the sword gourd was raging, Lu Ye's divine sense surged and led his Dao soldiers into another blood river. The strength distribution of the human race cultivators in the Jade Blood Holy Land was actually quite awkward. There were a lot of top powerhouses, and dozens of old seniors could be said to be the mainstay of the Jade Blood Holy Land. There were also a lot of cultivators at the grassroots level. This was the case everywhere, and it was the same for the major sects of the 9 regions. However, there were very few orthodox masters, such as those between the 5th and 9th order Divine Sea realms. This couldn't be helped. The Jade Blood Holy Land had only been established for 30 years. Even though Feng Wujiang had migrated a large number of humans from the surrounding 100,000 kilometers of the Divine Gate Sea and had the support of the 9 states, and the old seniors had personally taught the human race cultivation, the time was too short. It was very difficult for the Holy Land's human race to reach the 5th order. This was also the biggest disadvantage of the human race in every battle with the blood race. It was true that the elders could slaughter the blood race army as they pleased, but the human race would always suffer a crushing defeat in a proper battle of experts. If it weren't for the elders holding them back, the human race would have been defeated a long time ago. The appearance of the twin chi-linked branches array disk smoothed out this gap to a great extent. Even if several human race cultivators at the 1st or 2nd order Divine Sea realm formed an array, they would still have the capital to contend with a 5th order Divine Sea realm enemy, and they would most likely have the upper hand. Lu Ye's vampiric Dao soldiers were all the more precious. Thus, his mission in this battle wasn't to kill the blood tribe cultivators at the Cloud River tier and True Lake tier. These enemies could be left to the humans of equal strength. He wanted to find blood tribe cultivators at the Spirit Ocean tier to kill. Only then would he be able to reduce the pressure on the humans. Of course, Lu Yi would not show mercy to those who could be easily eliminated. It was just a matter of convenience, so why not? Although the battlefield was chaotic, Lu Yi had his divine will. It was not difficult for him to find a blood race warrior of the Divine Sea Realm. There were many Divine Sea Realm warriors among the blood race. One Divine Sea Realm blood race cultivator after another died under the 9 palace array. Lu Yi had never killed Divine Sea Realm cultivators to his heart's content since he started cultivating. Of course, he also knew that this was not his own ability. This was the overall strength of the Dao soldiers in him. However, if one walked the road at night too often, they would eventually meet a ghost. His performance attracted the attention of many blood race cultivators, mainly because they did not understand why he had the help of their own race's masters. Dao soldiers had never appeared on the battlefield between the two races before. This time, the blood race suffered a great loss as soon as they were brought out. After killing the blood clan members in the Divine Sea Realm in one of the rivers of blood and escaping, another river of blood came crashing down and enveloped him, Dao Shi-san, and the rest of the Dao soldiers. Then, with a flash of blood-red light, a figure seemed to float in front of him. Lu Yi instinctively pulled out his mountain coiling saber and slashed forward. A clanging sound rang out as a huge force swept over. Lu Yi felt his arm go numb and the blood in his chest tumble. If it were not for the help of the array, he would have been at a disadvantage. It was an 8th order Divine Sea Realm blood race cultivator. Lu Yi instantly judged the other party's cultivation. Among the blood race cultivators he had killed before, the highest cultivation was only at the 6th order Divine Sea Realm. It could be said that this was the strongest blood race cultivator he had encountered so far. It was not that there were no 9th order Divine Sea Realm cultivators. There were hundreds of thousands of them in the blood race army, and 9th order Divine Sea Realm cultivators were everywhere. However, the top Divine Sea Realm cultivators were currently besieging the human race's old seniors. Every blood race cultivator had their own battlefield. With the Dao soldiers around him, Lu Yi could clearly see the enemy's position. He had done this before when he killed the enemy. The only ones who knew the details of the blood river were always the blood race cultivators themselves. As long as he could find the location of the main body of a blood race cultivator, killing the enemy was not difficult. However, the situation was different this time. The enemy's cultivation was too high and his movements were too fast. Although Lu Yi could clearly see his position, it was useless if he could not keep up with his speed. With a thought, Lu Yi urged the power of his talent tree. Before the battle, he had considered how to deal with such a master. Borrowing the power of his talent tree was undoubtedly the best way. Roots invisible to the naked eye stretched out and plunged into the blood river, devouring it. Lu Yi could even devour the power of the real blood river, let alone the secret technique of a blood race cultivator. Moreover, the blood river that the blood race cultivators used didn't appear out of thin air. It was a manifestation of their strength, and the energy contained in it was extremely rich. As such, Lu Yi urging his talent tree to devour the blood river was equivalent to devouring the heritage of the blood race master. With the 9 palace chain array, this 8th order Divine Sea Realm blood race cultivator couldn't do anything to Lu Yi for the time being. Although Lu Yi couldn't do anything to him, it was impossible for them to remain in this stalemate forever. When the time came, it would be the blood race who would suffer. As time passed, the blood river would collapse on its own, and the blood race cultivator's strength would be damaged. The changes in the blood river naturally couldn't be hidden from the blood race cultivator. After all, it was a manifestation of his strength. The moment he realized something was wrong, he cried out, "What are you?" It had always been the blood race who devoured the blood of the human race, but he never thought that one day he would see a human devouring a blood race cultivator. 2K While he was still in shock, he saw Lu Yi biting a blood crystal in his mouth. With a grunt, he crushed it. After such a long battle, he had consumed a lot of his spirit chi, so he took this opportunity to replenish it. But when the blood race cultivator saw this scene, he couldn't help but be shocked. Feeling the power of the blood river rapidly weakening, he didn't dare to continue maintaining this secret technique. He immediately rolled up his body and allowed the blood river to quickly merge into his body. Lu Yi saw the light of day and the flying wing spirit crests on his back unfolded. With the support of wind travel, he rushed towards the Spirit Sea Realm Blood Race Cultivator like a bolt of lightning. Dao 13 and the other Blood Race Dao soldiers followed like shadows, instantly engulfing the enemy. Holding the mountain coiling saber in front of him, Lu Yi thrust it forward, causing specks of starlight to flicker. Tyrannical first form, starry sky. Facing this attack, the Blood Race Cultivator wasn't afraid. With his 8th Order Divine Sea Realm Cultivation, he had the capital to be fearless. Sending his divine sense towards Lu Yi, he stretched out his hand and stabbed towards Lu Ye's chest with his sharp fingernails. If this attack connected, Lu Yi might not be able to survive even with the protection of the Scarlet Dragon battle robe. But at this moment, the spirit chi around the Blood Race Cultivator suddenly became chaotic and a petal appeared out of thin air. The petal was huge, and under the Blood Race Cultivator's stunned gaze, it wrapped him tightly in an instant. The Blood Race Cultivator's sharp fingernails stopped at Lu Ye's chest, but Lu Ye's saber had already descended. Blood splattered as the Blood Race Cultivator's body stiffened. At the same time, Dao 13 punched out with his fists, and the other Blood Race Dao soldiers also clawed out. In a one-on-one fight, no one was his opponent, but under the cover of this array, who would dare to fight him one-on-one? This was a group attack tactic. Lu Yi put away his saber and rushed towards the direction of another Spirit Sea Realm Blood Race Cultivator. The 8th Order Blood Race Cultivator behind him had already turned into a pile of minced meat. He didn't even have time to dig out his blood crystal. 2,000 meters away on the city wall, Yuji smiled slightly and withdrew her slender jade finger, her spirit chi slowly calming down. On the Blue Blood Holy Land side, there were about 70 seniors from the 9 states who were still alive. On average, each island could be guarded by 6 or 7 people. However, the island where Lu Yi was located only had Meng Jie and Yuji. The reason for this arrangement was because of the Blood Race Dao soldiers that Lu Yi had trained. With over 100 Blood Race Dao soldiers, there was no need for too many seniors. Meng Jie had already killed his way out, and Lu Yi and the Dao soldiers followed closely behind, but Yuji was still here. Naturally, she wasn't just here to watch the show. As the top Dharma cultivator from the 9 states, even if she just stood here, the Blood Race cultivators she targeted wouldn't have a good ending. However, because she had to be on guard, she couldn't take action often. She could still lend Lu Yi a hand at a critical moment. The petal that wrapped around the Blood Race cultivator just now was her work. She might not have a good way to deal with the Blood Race cultivator hiding in the Blood River, but since he revealed himself, he was a target for her. The battlefield was chaotic, and Lu Yi could feel streaks of earth-shattering auras colliding continuously. Those were the seniors from the 9 states displaying their might. Almost every senior was surrounded by a large number of Blood Race cultivators at the Divine Ocean Realm. They weren't afraid of death, and they used their bodies and lives to restrain these seniors. There were also solo fights, and those were the Blood Race's Saint Seeds. Although the seniors were powerful, the Saint Seeds weren't ordinary either. Almost every Saint Seed had the power to match those seniors. Lu Yi previously thought that he was the only Saint Seed on the Star Moon Saint's side. Now, he knew that he was wrong. The Star Moon Saint wasn't the only Saint Seed on the northern battlefront. There were at least 5 of them. Previously, they had concealed themselves, and Lu Yi couldn't sense them. Now that they had revealed themselves, their powerful might was obvious. The Blood Race army's attack never stopped. The humans had some concerns, and they could only maintain the battlefront a few hundred feet away from the island. They couldn't advance because they couldn't receive support from the rear, and they couldn't retreat because the Blood Race would break through the defensive line. This area of a few hundred feet had become a forbidden zone for life. The Blood Race suffered heavy casualties, and the humans also suffered heavy casualties. This was the case for this battle, and it was the same for all the previous battles. Chapter 1041. On the chaotic battlefield, Lu Yi felt like he was surrounded by enemies from all directions. This was one of the advantages of not having to worry about accidentally injuring his own people, but the downside was that he was constantly fighting with others, and there was no time for him to rest. Fortunately, it was easy for him to replenish his own energy, but it wasn't so convenient for other human cultivators. If this went on, the human race would definitely be weakened. Of course, it was the same for the blood race. The blood race's situation was more serious because they didn't have support from the rear. On the human race's side, the array formation on the small island never stopped providing support. Although it wasn't as dense as before, it still continued to work and killed many blood race cultivators. At this point, the battle had become a competition of tenacity between both sides. The blood race's million-strong army came aggressively. They originally wanted to take down the Jade Blood Sacred Ground in one fell swoop. They had the capital and confidence to do so. If it was the Sacred Ground 2 months ago, the probability of stopping the blood race's attack was less than 30%. However, with the popularization of the twin chi and branch formation and the twin chi and branch formation that was set up on the small islands, it became the greatest help for the human race. This infuriated many blood race experts. Lu Yi wasn't sure about the situation on the other small islands because the battlefield was too vast and chaotic. With his pitiful divine thought, he couldn't detect too far away. However, based on the current situation, the small island he was in charge of had a good defense. He didn't need to care about the situation on the other small islands. Each small island had a few seniors in charge, and they would only do better than him. Just as Lu Yi was thinking about this, he suddenly felt a great sense of danger. An invisible terror lingered in his heart, and then a great pressure came from afar. He looked up and saw a bloody light rushing toward him. That bloody light shuttled nimbly on the battlefield and was 3 miles away in the blink of an eye. Star Moon Holy Venerable. Lu Yi knew who was targeting him. Since the beginning of the battle, Star Moon Holy Venerable had been holding down the fort at the back and hadn't intervened. However, he had no choice but to take action now. What Lu Yi didn't expect was that this guy would target him first. Was it the existence of the blood race's Dao soldiers that attracted his attention? There was a possibility. This was the first time Dao soldiers had appeared on the battlefield of the war between the two races. Moreover, the other blood race Dao soldiers all had their own formations. Only his side had 2 more human figures. This was a little eye-catching. The Star Moon Holy Sovereign probably wanted to understand the profoundness of the Dao weapon. Hence, he came to look for Xiao Qin directly. However, Li did not panic in the slightest. He did not even have any intention of retreating. This was because he knew that someone was watching the holy venerables of the blood race. It would have been fine if Xingyue had not made a move. However, since she had made a move, it was not up to him to make a move. With his small arms and legs, killing some blood breeds at the divine ocean realm was the right thing to do. As expected, a sonorous sword hum rang out, and a beam of sword light pierced out diagonally toward the Star Moon Saint, stopping him 3 lis away. Then a great battle broke out. Violent repercussions swept out, and the entire divine watchtower sea seemed to be seething. The 2 figures entangled with each other and spun into the air like a top, quickly leaving the main battlefield. Lu Yi looked up and could vaguely see Jianghu Hong's figure in the sword light. High up in the sky, there were many small battlefields that had been set up individually. Those were the places where the holy seeds and the old seniors fought. The repercussions of their battle were too terrifying. Only by staying far away from the main battlefield could they avoid being swept in by the cultivators of the 2 races. The blood race's holy venerables would definitely not consider this. To them, it did not matter how many blood breeds died. If the blood race's death could drag a human cultivator down with them, it would be worth it. However, since they were going against the old seniors, the choice of the battlefield was not up to them. The old seniors from the 9 states naturally had the means to shift the battlefield away. Lu Yi retreat. At this moment, a gentle voice rang in Lu Ye's ears. Without any hesitation, he led his 8 Dao soldiers and retreated to the back. He landed on the wall of the small island, but there was no trace of Yuji nearby. Lu Yi frowned. He knew that something was wrong. Yuji was this small island's strongest defense. She had to stay here all the time to prevent the blood race's strong cultivators from taking advantage of her. However, she had disappeared at this moment. Clearly, something unexpected had happened. Before she disappeared, she sent a voice transmission to Lu Yi, asking him to retreat and take over her position. Under normal circumstances, Lu Yi did not have this ability. However, if he formed a formation with the Dao soldiers, he could barely do it for a while. Looking around, he still could not see Yu Ji's figure. Lu Yi immediately cast his gaze into the blood sea. There was no reason for such a big living person to disappear into thin air, let alone a strong cultivator like Yu Ji. Since she was not in his field of vision, there was only one place left. Yu Ji had entered deep into the blood sea. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi cast his gaze into the blood sea, a huge bubble surged out from the depths of the blood sea, mixed with violent spiritual energy fluctuations. The small island buzzed and trembled as if there was an earthquake. Yu Ji was fighting with someone. And the only thing that could fight with her was the holy seed. A holy seed had secretly dived into the blood sea. In the blood refinement realm, the blood race's feelings toward the blood sea were very complicated. Before they reached adulthood, they absorbed nutrients from the blood sea to grow stronger. However, after they reached adulthood, the blood sea was a forbidden land that they could not easily touch. No one knew why this was so. They had spent countless years like this. However, the blood race had the chance to enter deep into the blood sea to cleanse their bloodline and become stronger. Of course, the risk was extremely high. Back then, Jianghu wanted to enter deep into the blood sea to cleanse his bloodline so that he could continue to serve Lu Yi. In the end, he failed as expected. But to the holy seeds, the blood sea was a place that they could go as they pleased. They would even cultivate in the blood sea, maintaining a rapid pace of growth until their cultivation reached the peak, unable to advance any further. The Jade Blood Sacred Land used the vast Shinkei Sea as a barrier. Although this gave countless ordinary blood race a headache, there was also a drawback. That was, the holy seeds could use the cover of the blood sea to approach them silently. In the past, the destruction of the outer islands was basically related to this. In this regard, the old seniors of the human race were naturally on guard. This was also the reason why every small island had an old senior overseeing it. It was to prevent such a thing from happening. Now, Yu Ji was fighting with the holy seed under the blood sea. Lu Yi did not know who was stronger and who was weaker. He only knew that if Yu Ji did not quickly think of a way to move the battlefield away, this small island would not be able to hold on. The island trembled incessantly. Lu Yi could not even stand steadily. Large amounts of cracks began to appear on the city walls, looking as if it would collapse at any moment. Fortunately, Yu Ji did not disappoint Lu Yi. After about 10 breaths of time, the blood sea's waves rolled, and two figures emerged one after the other. One of them was Yu Ji. It was unknown what kind of miraculous technique she used, but the holy seed had no choice but to obediently follow behind her. In the blink of an eye, they became two dots of light in the sky. The island's trembling did not stop. Under the sea, powerful energy fluctuations were undulating. Another figure arrived in a flash. With a serious expression, he directly jumped into the blood sea. Lu Yi did not recognize this old senior, but he was obviously from the 9 states. Soon, this old senior rushed out of the blood sea, but there was no sign of the holy seed. Lu Yi was puzzled. He originally thought that there was another holy seed causing trouble under the sea, but it did not seem to be the case. Sensing Lu Yi's gaze, this old senior looked up and sighed. "We can't keep it." Lu Yi immediately understood that the holy seed had left some special means under the sea. Yu Ji might not have discovered it, but it was more likely that she had discovered it but could not do anything about it. Demon-suppressing museum. The only thing she could do was take the holy seed away. The island's trembling became more and more intense. The city's walls continued to collapse, and the earth began to crack open. Blood poured in. Amidst cries of alarm, many human cultivators on the island rose into the air. In a short while, the island sank more than 30 meters, and it looked like it would be submerged by the blood-red sea. Without the support of the defensive fortifications on the island behind them, the human cultivators on the battlefield were instantly in a dire situation. Originally, with the support from the rear, the human side could not be said to have a great advantage, but there was no problem in maintaining the situation. However, the island had sunk and the defenses had all been destroyed. Without the support from the rear, the pressure on the front suddenly increased. There was still an endless stream of vampires joining the battlefield, and there was no end to it. Beside Lu Yi, that old senior had already turned into a streak of light and charged into the enemy group. At the same time, he issued an order. Retreat. The human race's strength was limited, and they could not waste their forces on this kind of entanglement. With that order, the human cultivators retreated as they fought, and soon, they had retreated to the island's original location. More and more cultivators gathered, and almost all of them were injured, but their eyes were incomparably resolute. They each formed a formation and stood in the air. The island was gone, but they were still there. Flesh and blood were also a line of defense. The vampires under Lu Ye's command also charged back. Of the 100 or so vampires, they had lost 20 or so, and only 70 or so survived. It was clear to see how intense the battle was. The human cultivators retreated, but the battle was still fierce. The old senior was surrounded by a large number of vampires, and his figure could no longer be seen in the distance. Suddenly, a ray of light bloomed, and then it became as bright as day. Under the cover of the light, the unpredictable vampires transformed into vampires. The 5 old seniors' figures were revealed, and spiritual energy surged around their bodies. There were no survivors within 100 meters of them. However, after a moment of silence, vampires from all directions continued to charge toward him. There were even vampires swarming toward Lu Yi and the others, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. A gap had been torn in the outer defense line of the Jade Blood Holy Land. This was an opportunity for the vampires, and they naturally would not let it go. Looking at the swarm of vampires, Lu Ye's divine sense surged, and he issued an order to all the vampires. In the next moment, the blood energy around the 70-odd divine sea realm vampires surged and gathered, forming a huge river of blood. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.